Welcome to the Turtleshell Therapy Institute, a podcast made to help you learn how to feel more comfortable inside and outside of your shell. Hello, I'm your host, James Nee Hundley. Today, we're going to be talking about the anxious attachment style, going a little deeper into what the anxious attachment style is, how people develop it, why we develop it, and ways that we can slow down to try to understand what is eliciting the anxious attachment defenses or protections that we've developed, and do we actually need them in this time or in this situation? That's a big thing with insecure attachment patterns. They are coming up to try and help us. Now, they're not always helpful in every situation, and I know that's kind of a newer concept, the idea that they even could be helpful in any way. And if we think about it, the reason we develop these patterns was to help us get through a situation. Now, they weren't always helpful, but sometimes they actually were helpful. So what we can do is we can take these patterns, become aware of them, and maybe even fine-tune them to be more helpful for us. Because anxiety, especially, is not a disorder. It can become disordered, which is different. So I think that's a good place to start. If we're going to talk about anxious attachment, I think really understanding what is anxiety, why do we have it, and at what point is it natural, and at what point does it become maladaptive, unhealthy, unhelpful, disordered, whatever language. So anxiety exists in all living things. We all have it. The purpose of it is survival. It's our natural survival instinct, because that's what it really comes down. Now, when I say survival, yeah, we're going to think mostly like our physical safety and staying alive. That's definitely part of it, avoiding injury, physical injury. But we also want to think about the mental and emotional piece of it. The brain doesn't actually know the difference between physical pain and emotional pain. It just knows they both hurt. So what is emotional pain? That's when you think of that, notice what comes up. What do you first think of when I'm talking about emotional pain? A lot of times we can think of heartbreak, loneliness, really any form of like discomfort, feeling anxious, feeling really angry. Those feelings don't feel comfortable, especially in this society we've created where we haven't really been taught how to sit with our emotions, to understand them and to feel them and process them. That's a big component of therapy, helping people do that, notice their emotions, listen to them without acting on them, so we can decide, is this something I need to take action in? And what is a responsive way to take it? So anxiety exists in all of us. It's that fight, flight, freeze, fawn response that I talked about in earlier episodes. So that's where we can sit down and try to think when we're feeling anxiety. It's helpful to identify what is bringing up the anxiety, and is this something that I need to respond to? That's a first step. Do I need to respond to this, or is my anxiety preparing me for something that may or may not happen? Because anxiety tells us what we fear will happen, not what actually will happen. So it's important to assess that. Once we have that figured out, and say maybe it is something we do need to have anxiety over. Remember, anxiety is a motivator. It doesn't always feel that way because we're not accustomed to really sitting down and seeing anxiety as something that could be helpful. We see it mostly as something that's uncomfortable, something to be avoided, something to manage, to control. But if we can really see it for what it's trying to do, that helps take away the intensity. Because a lot of times, like all emotions, but anxiety is the same, it comes back more intensely when it feels like it's not being heard or listened to, when it feels like it's being straight up ignored. Now, sometimes it does come in like a rush, but our anxiety may has learned that that's the only way to get us to listen to it, is to come in like a rush And then it's our job to slow down and really listen to the anxiety to see, okay, is this something that I actually need to have my guard up? And thank you, anxiety, for trying to protect me. Or is that because maybe it's feeling familiar to past experiences, or this feels like something that could lead to something that you really. So when we're noticing anxiety, something that can be helpful is slowing down. So what do I mean when I say that? That can look like a lot of different things. So slowing down could just be taking a breath, acknowledging the anxiety, or just noticing how your body's feeling. If we pay attention to the body, that can usually tell us a lot, because different anxieties or different emotions may feel very similar, but there can be slight differences, especially if we're able to slow down, notice our body, and notice our thoughts. Those can be good indicators of what I'm feeling. So for some people, anxiety might feel like the stomach dropping, or some sort of like rush or tightness in their chest, maybe a clenching of their jaws or tensing of their shoulders and neck. Thoughts might be pretty fear-based. There may be some anger and frustration in there as well too. Might feel some sadness, but mostly your thoughts are going to feel somewhat fear-based, like you're trying to avoid something, or like feeling out of control. Feeling out of control is a big piece for a lot of emotions, but especially anxiety. Anxiety does not like to feel out of control. And that's a big part of being human. That's why we don't like a lot of things that can be, and why we don't like a lot of things that have uncertainty in them. Sometimes uncertainty can be exciting, but not for everybody and not in every situation. It's also why in a lot of human cultures, we like to get really concrete with things. Either or thinking, it can be very problematic, and it can feel very safe. If I know something can either be this or this, that feels a lot safer than the idea of a spectrum, or both and, or thinking that, yeah, there could be more than just a few options of something, especially if it's something I believe this entire time. It can elicit a lot of anxiety. And then an attack on worldview. It may not even be an attack, but I'm using that term because a lot of people will say it feels like an attack on their worldview. That's very scary, because things that might not make sense. And then that can elicit the fight response or the flee response that we'll see in people, especially when we're thinking of these bigger socio-political conversations. People have really strong worldviews because that creates a sense of safety for them. Now, it can be a sense of false safety, and it can be misinformed. And at the same time, it creates comfort. And the brain is always trying to look for regulation. When the nervous system feels dysregulated, processing. But especially when we think of EMDR therapy, that's that AIP, the adaptive information processing mechanism that the brain holds. It tries to heal, it tries to regulate. And sometimes, with certain things, the only way to do that is to make sense of things. And sometimes that means narrowing it down. It's something that we have to be very aware of as humans, that we're capable of that, because when we do that, we can see how it can cause a lot of problems, not just in greater society, but also in our interpersonal lives. If I just think a person is good or bad, or I think this person is a friend or is trying to hurt me in some way in every situation, it is going to be really hard and scary to navigate the world. That doesn't mean that it's always wrong. That's going back to what I was saying in the beginning. We do want to be aware of these senses, because sometimes it can be intuition. And that's a whole other conversation that I have, and a soapbox I have around why do we have a hard time understanding the difference between our anxiety and our intuition. A lot of it has to go with just some societal norms that we created, this suppression of our emotions and of our instincts, our intuition, that we're taught to do in a really young age to help us fit into this modern society that we've all created, which is all made up at the end of the day. I'm not saying that society is completely bad. I definitely enjoy some of the perks of it. And it's come with a lot of problems that have taught us to disconnect and not trust our own instincts, our own intuition, our emotions. And so we can't always tell the difference of what is a false alarm and what is an actual situation. I think it's really important for me to bring this up in the beginning of this conversation because I know when I talk about it, it can feel like I'm saying to dismiss your emotions and to not believe them. Really, what I'm saying is don't go with them as the first and only possibility in a situation. We don't have to mistrust them, but let's just hold them as one perspective and see if we can assess and open up for other perspectives or possibilities. Because anxiety is very helpful, but it's not always rational. It's meant to work quickly. Now, that is for a whole myriad of reasons. It does make sense for things like anxiety and other mechanisms, other emotions to work very quickly and have us act quickly. Because if we think about when we were before this modern society, when we were living more off the land, we were living in smaller communities, we did have bigger threats like other animals, weather, sometimes even other communities of people, and we would have to think quickly in order to survive. That doesn't serve us as much now in this society, which is confusing because we live in a capitalist society here in the United States, and that really pushes for moving quickly and thinking quickly. But it's to exercise a different part of our brain. This society is wanting us to process information quickly using our prefrontal cortex, only our logical brain. Whereas what gets elicited, especially in pre-modern society, it's more our emotional brain and our survival brain that has us think quickly. And that was more helpful back then. But in order for us to stay in our prefrontal cortex, we do have to keep a steady pace. And stress can knock us into our emotional or survival brain, especially anxiety, because that's where anxiety lives, and its primary function is to motivate us. So I'm mostly talking about emotional and physical injury, but let's apply this to some more modern society things. Anxiety is helpful at making us be on time for things, to follow completion dates. So in school, I have an assignment that is due at this time. My anxiety can keep me at a regular pace, not eliciting my amygdala. Oh, I have to get this done. And that motivates us to get it done. Now, that doesn't always feel like anxiety to people, but that's a more typical motivating anxiety. I mean, it's all motivating because even when it's fear-based, it's motivating you to act. You can feel the fear and it can feel more uncomfortable. Whereas the anxiety I'm describing to get an assignment done or complete something for work or get somewhere on time, that might feel more gentle. It's more of like a nudge. Oh, I have to do this. Okay, I will do this. But as people may know with this, as it gets closer and closer to the time it needs to be done, you may notice more of a fear-based anxiety start to build up in you, something a little more intense. So I hope that makes sense. That's just kind of breaking down anxiety, what its purpose is, how to be helpful, why it comes out when we're not feeling physically safe or emotionally safe. Oh, yeah. So for those things being on time, assignments, things for work, there is the urgency that comes in a sense, there is safety in it because it might be different motivations for different people. Safety in the sense of I want to be seen as somebody reliable, because that creates safety for me. I want to be seen as somebody that people can count on because that creates safety for me. And that can be mutually beneficial. If I show people that I can be reliable, then most people then will be reliable to me. And that's just natural. That's creating safety, that's creating flow and functioning in a community, and that can help regulate our nervous systems as social animals. We also may be avoiding some sort of consequence, like a bad grade or being lectured even. Because even if the lecture doesn't feel like a threat to the relationship, that can create safety. Somebody being disappointed in you or upset with you may elicit feelings of shame or guilt, or just not liking going through the experience of being told that you let somebody down. So there's an avoidance there. And in a sense, we can think of that as trying to stay safe, emotionally safe, because then I don't have to go through that uncomfortable experience. The motivation might also be thinking of your team or of other people that may be counting on this, or how that it might impact them if you don't follow through with something. Okay. So anxiety isn't necessarily a disorder. It's very helpful and it helps us function a lot in society. Even though it's still operating a bit more like pre-modern society, we are finding it helpful in aspects of our society. So keep that in mind. Anxiety does not necessarily mean disorder or something negative or something that has to be totally managed or controlled. It just means something to take note of. Anxiety is motivating, and it likes certainty, it likes predictability, and it likes to know that it won't be surprised. Another thing that anxiety will elicit out of you is to seek reassurance. Because anxiety doesn't like uncertainty. It doesn't want to be surprised. It wants to know what's coming. It wants to know that it is correct in either of the options that it can create for you, because once it starts to get intense, that's where it starts to knock you into that either or thinking. It will start to drive you to seek reassurance. That's what we see a lot in anxious attachment in relationships. We will see this low view of self and higher view of others, which can be a motivating factor to try to get other people to like you. An anxious attachment has taught you, in order for people to meet my needs or to keep me safe in a relationship, I have to make sure that I stay liked and somehow valued in the relationship. Now, anxiety is a spectrum. There are different anxious patterns, different anxious techniques that you may have learned depending on your lived experiences. One that a lot of people will think of when they think of an anxious attachment is this sort of push-pull, this trying to get the other person to like you, maybe changing yourself or even compromising yourself in different ways, like changing how you dress, how you act, your worldviews, trying to become somebody that this other person will like. And all of that work and effort will naturally start to build some sort of resentment or frustration, because nobody's necessarily going to meet you where you're at with that. And it doesn't feel good to think that you're not worthy and to have a lower view of yourself. So sometimes that will motivate then what people might call the push, where you start to get angry. Other motivators for that might be the only way I learned how to get my needs met. Being subtle doesn't get the needs met. I don't really know how to be direct. That's really scary. So I get really big and I escalate the situation. Sometimes it doesn't always go straight to that. Sometimes, because with anxiety, well, with both insecure approaches, anxious and avoidant, it's really dangerous, or it feels very dangerous, to be direct and just ask for your needs. And in both cases, you usually have learned through your lived experiences that that's not really going to get me what I need anyway, just because of the people that you interacted with, or maybe never really seeing it work for other people, or it's just never really worked for you for different ways, because maybe of the person you were interacting with, or not really knowing how to be direct, so you're not even sure how to do it at all. And so you might try and do it very subtly or very passively at first, and then it might develop to being passive aggressive or aggressive, because you've learned that that's how you get your needs met. Being upset with the person, being really big, or saying things to try to make the other person maybe feel guilty or like they owe you. Again, these don't make you a bad person. For pretty much everybody I've ever interacted with an anxious attachment style, myself included, I have anxious attachment tendencies. Not in every relationship context, but in a lot of them. And it doesn't make us bad people. It means that we don't know how to feel safe or how to get our needs met in this relationship. And so we are resorting to these tactics, which in almost every scenario I've ever seen was either modeled by a past relationship, either a romantic relationship or a friendship. Maybe that's how you saw your parents get their needs met from either each other or other people, or maybe even with you. You could have learned that from several different kinds of relationships. Even television. We don't want to discredit the impact that media and television has on how we learn how to exist and interact in relationships. It plays a role, especially in, well, every generation that's alive. We all grew up on TV, some more than others. And that's not specific generations. Some generations did grow up. In all generations, some people did have more exposure to media than others. It's not just millennials and Gen Zs all grew up on TV and boomers and Gen X didn't. In each generation, we can find different people who maybe had more exposure to media than others. Media has been around for a very long time. It's not just TV and the internet. Magazines, really anything that has influenced mainstream culture, all can play a part in how we develop our attachment patterns and how we exist in relationships. So back to the anxious attachment style. It's looking for reassurance in different ways, which very much may be true, but just for the simplicity of the conversation, we will look at that as anxiety. I'm too scared to approach it. Eventually, anxiety will drive you to action because it is an action-oriented feeling. Eventually, anxiety will drive you to action because it is an action-oriented feeling. So even if it's not direct, you may start doing things like, this can be something that can drive people to start looking through their partner's phones. You might start to try to look for people on social media, see what their activity is, and create meaning out of that. Now, again, this isn't anxiety necessarily being bad. We can definitely take it in, and if we try to just deny it, it just makes the spiral worse. So I'm not saying fully accept, oh, maybe somebody's doing something without you, or maybe somebody's doing something behind your back. But if you're feeling this urge to try to figure that out by spying on them or trying to figure out what they're doing at this moment or we're doing at a certain time, taking that as one possibility that could be true. And let's take a breath. Let's recognize that I'm feeling insecure in the relationship. I'm scared something is going to happen, something negative is going to happen, and my anxiety wants me to prevent it. Let's talk a little bit more about what we can do with anxiety. Now that I've given a backdrop of what it looks like, how it can show up in attachment, and we'll keep talking more about it. It can be complex, and everything I'm saying, anxiety can develop different patterns. I'm just talking about some specific ones that I tend to see in my work as a therapist, and that tends to come up a lot in the literature when you're reading about anxious attachment. But there's a full spectrum in the attachment styles, and even when we think specifically of anxious attachment, it can look different depending on the person, and the patterns might look different depending on the kind of relationship. Friend, family, romantic, work, society in general, even our relationship with ourselves. We might use different anxious strategies to try and get our needs met and help us feel safe in a relationship. So as I'm talking, you may be like, that's not my experience. That's okay. I'm going to talk more about anxious attachment throughout different episodes and bring it up. But like I said, I'm mostly just focusing on some of these more common, like specific things, and I'm not going to be able to hit all of it. But we'll keep talking about it, and I would encourage you to keep doing your own research as well too on this attachment style, especially if it feels relevant. Theory journal. In my book, The Attachment Theory Journal, it's a guided journal. So I had word counts I had to follow, and I couldn't really put a ton in here. And the book is intended to be a companion to the Attachment Theory Workbook, which was written by Annie Chen. which I did read to help me write the guided journal. It is really good. I would recommend it. It definitely is able to go more in depth in the information than I was able to in the guided journal, because my journal is more strategies and techniques to help you that can be applied while with the knowledge that you gain from the workbook. So section 2 of my guided journal, it's all focused on the anxious attachment style and different techniques and different strategies to help you learn more about your anxiety and to help you slow down and assess, do I need my anxiety right now, or is it being overprotective? I'm using the term overprotective because the language is also important. How we talk about ourselves and how we talk about our anxiety is really important in helping us better understand our anxiety and not let it drive all of our actions. It may seem silly, but the more negative we talk about something, the harder it's going to be for us to partner with it. And just like with any other emotion or feeling, if you don't like anxiety, it's going to keep coming back stronger and stronger because it wants you to listen. It wants you to take what it's saying into account and at least consider, is this possible? And as I say possible, I should also keep in mind, is this possible and is it probable? Because anxiety will come back and tell you, well, anything's possible. This is possible. And that's true. Anything is possible. But is it probable based on the other perspectives, the other pieces of evidence, the other things that I know that are true in this situation? This person has always been reliable. This person hasn't hurt me in the past. Other people have, but this person hasn't. That can make it scarier because it would hurt even more if that person did do this. And I really have no evidence to back up the idea that this specific person would hurt me the way other people have. Some people might say that's naive, but the alternative is to constantly be living in a state of waiting for somebody to hurt you. And that does not lead to a very good quality of life, and it makes it really difficult to maintain any sort of healthy and positive connection in your life. There are good people out there, just like there are people out there that have learned that in order to get my needs met, I have to hurt people in some way. That's that both and. It's all true, which can be really uncomfortable for anxiety because we just want to know how to predictably stay safe, how to just know what to do to prevent scary things or negative things from happening to me. That's important to honor and grieve that we don't have the possibility to do that, but our anxiety does make us aware. So just see it as like, yeah, check engine light on the car. Something might be happening here, might. So I'm just going to slow down and just check the situation out and just see, okay, is something going on under the hood? Or was it a false alarm? Did something just turn on the signal, maybe like a bump that I hit or something like that, or something an experience felt really familiar? We're just checking it out. Anxiety is very fast and it's seeking reassurance. We're not always going to be able to get the reassurance we want or need or are needing. So these strategies can be really helpful. You'll notice it leads with a breathing strategy. Now, breath is really helpful in anxiety. It's usually one of the few things that we still have control over other than our thoughts. When anxiety gets elicited in us, it activates our fear response or survival response. Different therapists use different terms for it. But what happens is our logical brain starts to shut down. We start to lose access to that part of our brain, the part that helps us think rationally, objectively, all of our executive functioning skills, to really look at nuances of situations. That starts to go down. Adrenaline goes into our bloodstream and our heart starts to beat faster. Our digestive system starts to shut down. That's why our stomach can feel weird. And our breath starts to shallow, so we can take deep breaths. Now, it doesn't all happen in that order. It just kind of depends on the situation. Different people might have different responses, but going back to the breath, that's a lot of where we can be proactive, or even respond when we're in it, when we're in our survival or our fear response or our stress response. So there's different breathing techniques. There's square breathing. My book talks about the 4 in, 8 out breath. Really what we're looking for is something to give you a rhythm. The counting can help you give a rhythm to stay focused on your breath. Because for some people, they can just focus on their breath and just stay focused on that. Some people need it to be a little more interactive. So counting, square breathing has different forms, but one that I know is breathe in, 1, 2, 3, 4, breathe out, 1, 2, 3, 4. Some variations have you breathe in, 1, 2, 3, 4, hold 1, 2, 3, 4, breathe out 1, 2, 3, 4, and you just keep doing that. If you want to get interactive with it, you can have your hand even make a square. I also know the lazy 8 breath, which is more for kids, but it's also helpful for adults. You just put your hand on something and you make a figure 8 while breathing in. So you start in the middle, inhale as you're making the first side of the 8, and then breathe out as you reach the center, and breathe out slowly as you are making it. And it's a lazy 8 because you're supposed to go slowly. The one in my book is one that actually is known to help with your heart rate, the 4 in breath and the 8 out breath. So what we found with this is it will actually help slow your heart rate if you breathe in 4 counts. 1, 2, 3, 4. And breathe out 8 counts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And doing that repeatedly will start to decrease your heart rate. Because we found that the longer the exhale, the shorter the inhale and the longer the exhale, that tends to slow our heart rate and slow our nervous system. The reverse, doing 8 counts inhale and 4 counts exhale, will actually increase our heart rate. So that can help you wake up if you're feeling kind of slow and groggy. My journal also goes on to have you, like we were talking about, reflecting on anxiety. What's it like to notice your anxiety? How do you feel about anxiety? Is this a comfortable topic? How has it been talked about in your family of origin? How is it talked about in your peer groups, in your culture, your community? All of this will influence how we feel about our anxiety, which ultimately then impacts our relationship with ourselves and our relationship with the world. If we see anxiety as a deficit or a weakness, anytime we feel anxiety, then we are going to then think, again, that either or thinking, well, if I have this and it means weakness or a deficit, then there must be a deficit or a weakness within me. And I have to control this. I have to manage it. And then it just becomes this cycle. We can even have anxiety about having anxiety. Oh gosh, I'm having this anxious feeling. What does this mean? So you can see how working through your relationship with anxiety can be really, really helpful in being able to better listen to it without it driving how you respond to a situation. So we're talking also about the self-narrative as a concept that'll come up in a lot of therapies. What is my self-narrative around this? Or what is my narrative? What is my story? What am I telling myself? What's the meaning that I am making out of having anxiety or having an anxious response? Or what meaning am I making out of having an anxious feeling? Now, a lot of people, again, we haven't been taught to really listen to our anxiety as just a possibility, so it can feel really scary. For some people, it can also feel really annoying. Oh, here's this feeling. I know it doesn't really mean what it feels like, and I just wish I didn't have this. There's like a resistance to it, or there's a full falling into it. Oh my gosh, I'm having this feeling, something bad is happening, and it can almost feel like you're having a premonition. And sometimes my anxiety is right, but it's important to sit back and think in these situations, was my anxiety right because it actually was true, my instincts were on? That is possible. Or was it because I was so anxious that in my trying to prevent something from happening, I inadvertently made it happen? That's the concept of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Sometimes we do that. We'll get so anxious something's going to happen that we actually will create it to happen. Or we're so anxious it's going to happen that we just completely avoid it and don't even experience really anything. We say no to a lot more things. And that's not necessarily a bad thing if you really don't want to do the things. But if you're finding your anxiety is preventing you from doing things that you want to do, then it's starting to become unhelpful and it's starting to impact your quality of life, which ultimately will impact your mental health, your mental wellness, and you're not going to be able to feel comfortable inside or outside of your shell if you're constantly living in a state of anxiety. So generalized anxiety disorder is a diagnosis that is pretty prevalent, especially in the United States. So this is where your anxiety has become more disordered. Going back to more of what I was just saying there, either you're in a constant state of anxiety or it's preventing you from doing things that you would like to do or would usually enjoy doing because of this general fear, this general anxiety. I just feel this most of the time. Most things elicit this out of me. A pretty common screening tool for this is called the GAD-7, Generalized Anxiety Screener. And some of you have probably taken it in your doctor's office. It's a pretty common tool. The other one that's pretty common would be like the Beck Depression Scale or the PHQ-9, which also rates depression. This one is specifically for anxiety. So it'll ask you, have you experienced this? Not at all. And they usually look at like the last 2 weeks or the last month. But have you experienced this not at all in the last several days, over half the days, nearly every day? So the questions are feeling nervous, anxious, or on edge, not being able to stop or control worry, worrying too much about different things, trouble relaxing, being too restless that it's hard to sit still, becoming easily annoyed or irritable, feeling afraid as if something awful might happen. So there's 7 questions, and then they have you score it, and then the higher your score, so if it's over an 8, that indicates a possible anxiety disorder. So that just means it's something to look at. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have mental illness or that you need to go on meds right away. It just means that your anxiety is a place for you than maybe other people whose anxiety might be at lower levels. Anxiety also elicits our negativity bias. So the negativity bias is something that we all have. It has helped us survive over the generations as a species. Some people have a stronger negativity bias than others. What it means is we just tend to see the negative anxiety. I'm going to focus on this negative thing because this could be the threat. I'm going to avoid this negative thing because this could be the threat. So to exercise the positive end of it, or even the neutral, sometimes positive is just not, that we just can't go there depending on where we're at in our lives or in that moment in time. Neutral is just as good. So trying to exercise the other side of that spectrum, trying to get out of our negativity bias, not to ignore it, just be open to other possibilities. This negativity bias could be right, but what else could be right, could be going on? Just to be open and be curious about it, because anxiety also takes away our curiosity, which that's where that either or thinking comes. It's either this or this. So we want to be curious because it may not be either or. It could be neither of the things that I'm thinking that my anxiety is telling me it is, but it could be a little bit of this. It could be a little bit of that. The prompts that I have you reflect on in the book is to think about a time where you actually felt comfortable in a relationship, reflecting on the kinds of thoughts that you had with that. Reflecting on the kinds of thoughts that you had in that relationship. What helped you not feel anxious in that relationship, or in those moments, maybe if it's not the full friendship or relationship, but the moments where you felt most secure and comfortable and like your anxiety wasn't there. Just being curious around what was it about that. And not just being curious, also just really feeling it. Getting that, noticing how it felt in your body. Noticing what was happening, the thoughts, so that you can start training your brain to also look for those things that felt neutral or positive in a relationship, not just the red flags, not just the negative. The red flags and the negative are important to help keep us safe, help us make sure that we're doing what's best for us, that we're looking those. We're going to find them, even if they're not there. We're always going to be worried that we're going to find them. And that can impact our quality of life and our quality of relationships. The book goes on to help you reflect on other things too. So like, what do you usually do when you're feeling anxious in a relationship? Getting to know your patterns, your behaviors. What are the thoughts? What's your body feeling like just before, during, and after, to try and get to know some of the signals and some of the cues. Also goes in to help you reflect on helpful anxiety, which we were talking about a little bit earlier. Who are the people that you feel comfortable reaching out to, if any? Most of us have someone, and if we don't, that will elicit more anxiety. So I want to take a moment and just validate that and honor that. Not all of us have a person that we feel totally comfortable with. And that's not because of a deficit within ourselves. A lot of that has to do with our lived experiences, just where we happen to be in life, situations, our location, area of the community that we're in. So if there isn't a person, I don't discredit your relationship with maybe pets or even plants, other living things. That can create a sense of security and safety. People who have a higher power, that's also a healthy connection and attachment that can be really helpful, especially if we can live without the shame and the judgment. That's really all we need to help with these exercises and getting more into our neutral or positive biases. The society, like I was saying, can also be a big contributor to this. I was talking a lot about media earlier, but even just looking at our social identity, how do we feel? Our attachment style can change, and our feelings about ourselves and our community, our society can change even with age. Being in a different stage of development in life or a different phase of life. How do we feel society feels about us? We are going to be focusing more on accessibility, but there is a difference between accommodation and accessibility. Accommodation says, we didn't really think of you, but since you're here, we will try to find a way to make you fit and make you feel. Accommodation is saying, we didn't really think of you, but since you're here, we will find a way to help you fit and feel as comfortable as possible. Accessibility means we already thought of you, so we already have these things in place for you to be here and for you to be comfortable. That's a huge difference. And if you're living your life feeling like you need a constant accommodation, that's also going to impact your relationship with yourself and with others. Faith and spirituality can impact this positively, negatively, or neutrally. How do we feel the world feels about your faith? How do you feel others feel about your faith? Is your faith a source of safety, or is it a source of shame and anxiety? All of these things are good to reflect on. Gender and sex. Do you feel like your community or where you are, the world, other people, do you feel like they respect your gender and will keep you safe? How do you experience your gender? And especially people in the trans or non-binary community, this can be a very complicated topic because as a society, we are working towards getting out of the binary mindset that there's only two genders when there's actually a full spectrum of genders. And unfortunately, particularly, well, I don't think just in the United States, I think actually in a lot of different cultures. I mean, if we look at the news, the trans community and non-binary community are being used as political agenda items and being used to push different agendas and being villainized. That is absolutely going to impact your attachment and your view of yourself and how safe you feel in your own society and your own culture. Race and ethnicity, sexual orientation, again, same thing. Those are all going to impact how you view yourself or the world, which is ultimately going to impact your attachment, because that is, how do I exist within relationships? How do I get my needs met? How do I stay physically and emotionally safe? And socioeconomic status can also be another one. And I'm sure there's many other identities that you can probably think of that may have impacted your attachment style, either positively, negatively, or neutrally. Maybe they don't all have to have an impact. This is just things to help you think on what has helped form my attachment patterns and how I exist in relationship. And I know I keep saying it, but I just want to reiterate, relationship is not just friends, family, romantic partners. It's your immediate community, your greater community, society, your relationship with yourself, all of those things. I was mentioning that the body holds a lot within us. It gives us those signals, that pit in the stomach, the tightness of the chest. It's important to notice, okay, what are the signals that my anxiety is coming up? So a lot of things to reflect on, and there are so many different things that impact our attachment style and can elicit our anxiety. You know, in the book too, we also talk about if specific relationships elicit more anxiety than others, especially when we think about relationships with our authority figures, with peers. You know, we go through so many different situations in the different phases of life. Like we think of school, where we're trying to fit in with our peers and also trying to have relationship with different authority figures. Those can all impact our attachment and can follow us into the workforce and adulthood. You know, we still have peers and we still have authority figures. And throughout our childhood, we learned how to interact with them and how to exist in those relationships. Some of us learned more adaptive techniques than others. And it all just kind of depends on the situation. You might notice too, throughout this entire episode, I'm trying to take out the self-blame. It doesn't mean that you are defective or anything is wrong. It also doesn't necessarily mean that the people around you were inherently bad people. Everybody is responding out of what they learned. So there's a whole generational piece in it. A lot of us are responding out of not just how we were parented, but also those same authority figures, our parents, our peers, are also a product of all of the other different relationships they interacted with, other peers, other authority figures, their relationship with society and their identities. It's all interacting. We're all interacting with each other. And all we can really do is try to slow down and understand. So the last practice that I have in the section on anxious attachment is the mindful moment. So in this fast-paced world, it's easy to get lost in the moment of the day. This can inadvertently activate our anxious attachment defenses. Taking a moment to check in with yourself can help. So try these steps at different moments throughout your day. You only need to set aside a minute or two throughout the day. So this is something to do multiple times a day. It's just a quick moment, you know, so that whatever that means for you, a moment could be 1 minute, but just a few minutes. Like, doesn't have to be very long. Just excusing yourself to the restroom or during your lunch break or whatever you're doing. There's 7 steps. So all you do is take a slow, deep breath. Notice where you feel the anxiety in your body. So I know for me, a lot of times I feel my anxiety in my gut and in my neck a lot. Acknowledge the anxiety without judgment, because all we're doing right here is just noticing it. Just noticing, where do we hold it in our body. Note if there's a narrative or a belief driving the anxiety. You know, is there like, I'm unworthy, I'm not intelligent, I'm not capable, you know, just notice what thoughts you're saying to yourself. It also may be outward. The world's unfair. People are mean. This person's unreasonable. Notice those. What's the narrative coming up? It doesn't always have to be self-referencing. Validate the narrative by saying that is a possibility. You know, depending on how long of a moment you want to take, but it doesn't have to take long. Just see if you can make space for other possibilities. Even if you can't think of the other possibilities, if you have time for that, absolutely. Try and think through what are some other possibilities. Neutral, positive, there can be other negative ones too. No judgment, just are there other possibilities? If you don't have time, see if you can just acknowledge the possibility that there are other possibilities, and I either don't know what they are, or I don't have time to think of the other possibilities right now. Then remind yourself your anxiety alerts you to what you fear might happen, not what will happen. And then from there, take another deep breath. And that's all you really need to do. Now, if you do have time or if you want to, you can notice in your body where the anxiety is and see if you can relax those areas by breathing into it and giving it a little attention, maybe even envision the muscles relaxing, or just see if you can get that tension to release or relax a little bit. Also see too, is there a way for me to gather more evidence if that's helpful or feels necessary? Because sometimes after you do this, you might be like, you know what, I don't actually really care about this that much. And that's genuine. It's not that big of a deal. I don't need to figure it out. That's okay. Then you can let it go. If it is something that you need to address later, it will come back up again. And then you can reassess at that time. So that's a lot to reflect on today. I do hope you try some of the exercises and just think about anxiety in a different way after listening to this episode. I hope this was helpful. I hope to see you back again at the Institute soon. Take care and have a great week.